Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I want to introduce you to a gentleman by the name of Richard Dunwoody tonight. He is the Executive Director of Project Recover. And what he's interested in is human trafficking, or at least stopping human trafficking. Richard, welcome to our show. How are you?
Good. Thank you, Brian, for having me.
My pleasure. So tell me, what is Project Recover?
So Project Recover is a volunteer organization of former financial service industry executives that work with survivors of human trafficking, specifically those involved in commercial sexual exploitation, in addressing the financial fraud and debt arising from their exploitation. So through survivor advocacy groups, we work with survivors to remove the fraud and debt that they face with creditors.
And so tell me what your role has been. You're the executive director. Did you found this organization or what?
So the Canadian Centre to End Human Trafficking asked for assistance for survivors in dealing with this issue. I came forward back in 2017, tried to bring financial services industries together to find a unified single process for survivors. That wasn't possible with different policies, procedures within all of the different organizations. So in 2018, we put together this model where we work directly with survivors, gather the information, do the research, and then present the fraud or findings to creditors so that they can make a decision on whether they're going to continue to pursue the survivor for repayment of the debt or they're going to remove the survivor's obligations.
So I guess there's two issues here. Number one, is human trafficking truly an issue? And how do these debts get created that are so problematic that you've got to come in and deal with them?
So, when I first started with this initiative, and I remember saying to the folks that asked me, great, I'll look to help you, but what does human trafficking have to do with debt and credit? And that comes from somebody with a 30-year executive background in financial services across banking across North America. And I was shocked at what I saw in just the first 60 to 90 days and uncovered. So is human trafficking an issue in Canada? Absolutely. Two references I give to the start of any conversation. 95% of the victims trafficked in Canada are Canadian born. This dispels the myth I think that many have, including myself, at the start, that victims are coming from foreign countries.
95% of the victims of human trafficking in Canada are Canadian born.
Commercial
Seriously?
sexual exploitation, absolutely.
How are people being found? Like, human trafficking is like in slavery, right? How are people being found in Canada?
We're dealing specifically with commercial sexual exploitation. So primarily girls being trafficked for sex, sold for sex.
So these are young girls, teenagers that are being captured
The average age of the survivors that I worked with when they were first trafficked is 14 years old. That's the average age. The youngest survivor.
The average age when they're first
trafficked
is 14 years old.
The youngest that I worked with was 10 years old when she was first trafficked. There are primarily four types of traffickers. And the definitions, the first is what they call a Romeo Trafficker. A Romeo Trafficker befriends a young girl as if it's a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship, showers them with gifts, treats them kindly, as if they found obviously the name Romeo, and then gradually they take over their life, tell them who they should have friendships with, who they shouldn't, distance them from the family. and then the physical and emotional violence starts in that relationship. Second type of trafficker, and I can explain these in far more detail, but we won't for brevity. The guerrilla trafficker is the second trafficker type. These are primarily gangs, organized crime. They abduct their victim right off of the streets, out of schools, out of colleges, out of universities. They bypass that grooming stage of the Romeo Trafficker, showering them with gifts, and lead them right to physical, start right with physical assaults. The third trafficking type is parents and foster parents that traffic their children. The fourth, and
Parents and foster parents that traffic their own children.
Traffic their own children.
Oh my God, you're kidding.
And the fourth, and because of the age, are high school boys that will traffic their victim through their friends, etc.
Is this a growing problem? I've heard about it, but I didn't realize it was such a big issue.
So because it's fairly new, since the prostitution laws were thrown out by the Supreme Court, so it's fairly new since 2015. So there are really no stats. Yet in Durham region alone, as a means of example, there were 252 individual human trafficking cases brought by the Durham Regional Police last year. We look in that, and I know this number because I just wrote about it. Over the week and a half period of the Christmas holidays, there were 3 different traffickers in 3 different cases charged with trafficking in Toronto alone. So the numbers are out there. I often, when I speak, the same question from the audience, I think that you're asking is, why don't we hear more of it? If you Google human trafficking Toronto, human trafficking Ontario, you will be shocked at the number of news stories that come up about the issue and traffickers that have been charged.
And for the people that you've been helping, how long are they captive of their Romeos or their gorillas or whatnot?
Yeah. So there is a wide, sort of range, and that some of the trafficking exploitation is only 6 months or a year before the girls are able to get away. We're talking predominantly girls right now. Those are again older girls that are abducted, out of college or university, and have a little bit more wherewithal to say, how do I get out of this quickly and escape? Because we're dealing with financial fraud and credit, they have to be of age in order to apply for credit cards or loans or credit instruments. So you're talking 4 to 5 years. And the average
and so the problem that you're dealing with is what? Is that you're suggesting that these girls, once they've been abducted or captured, and they're of age, what, their captures force them to apply for credit?
Well, so there's two ways that the trafficker will either use their identification without their knowledge. The credit is the primary vehicle through which the trafficking is conducted. Traffickers don't want to tie to them, so that if they're charged, they've got their credit cards that are renting the hotels, Airbnbs, cell phones in their names, etc. So the trafficker will use the identity of their victim or existing credit facilities if they're older when they're abducted to book hotels, Airbnbs, ads on escort sites. Leo's List is fairly common. They'll open bank accounts, deposit fake checks into those accounts, withdraw the money, and now that's associated with the with the victim's name and identity. And post exploitation, the creditors are chasing them for payment. Creditors not knowing what had gone on to arrive at that debt.
And so where you get involved is what, after it's gone to the police force and this person has some credit that they need to be dealt with, or
we get involved primarily through the advocacy agencies that work with survivors through all of the other issues. And we're starting now to work with survivors at a very early stage where criminal charges may not have yet been filed. But what we do is we identify who all of their creditors are and get the creditors to shut down the credit facilities if the trafficker is still out there so they can't abuse the credit even more, and then gather the information to prove that this is fraud and that remove the debt. So we're working with survivors, at times 2-3 weeks after they've been freed or able to escape. We do get referrals from from law enforcement. We do, and that. Sorry.
Just an unbelievable story. I never realized this problem was this extensive.
And when I first started, I didn't have a clue of the connection as well. The average debt load that we deal with is $28,000. That does not include student loans, which are a target of traffickers as well, forcing their victim to apply to a college or university, an application for a Canada student loan. When the government sends deposits of money into the victim's bank account, the trafficker takes the money, and they're left to deal with the repayment.
Is this primarily gang related, or these freelancers? I can't imagine how people get into this crime.
And that and I probably share why do people get into the crime. I'm amazed. Gang activity is common, so is organized crime, but it's anybody really, and that they're not all males. Females are traffickers. There's couples. The victims have been trafficked by their employers, by their their co-workers. It's a means of control. The average revenue per year that, and these are cases I've dealt with in the last year, so we've only been doing this for a year. The average revenue a trafficker earns per victim is somewhere between $200,000 and $400,000 a year.
Ouch. And this is they're acting as prostitutes, I presume, or escorts or strippers or what?
Well, okay, so both. They have no free time when they're a victim. They're a commodity. That's what I view. The trafficker views them as is a commodity. So they don't have free time. They don't work from 6 till 2 in the morning. If they're not, if they don't have a job to go to, they're going to be in a strip bar. And that working in a strip bar and the revenue they earn, the tips that they earn, go to the trafficker. They're going to work in a body massage parlor in their off time. And again, the revenue, the money goes to the trafficker.
And you've heard stories. At least I have heard stories about they truly think that they're in love with the pimp and the pimp is taking care of them. Is that why they don't escape, or why? What is it? Is it drugs? Is it threats of violence? What is it that's keeping them in this situation?
So it's threats of violence. And yes, in the initial stages of a Romeo Trafficker, that's what they feel. Is they're in love with this person. it's going to be a relationship much like anybody would when they're going to be 15, 16, 19 years old. We're starting a relationship. But the trafficker's goal, and we call it the grooming stage, is to create a divide between the victim and their family and friends, to dehumanize their victim, to make that their victim feel worthless, not intelligent, reliant on them, know their weaknesses. They know who their family is, who their siblings are, and then they get into the physical violence. And that violence, they now threaten to extend to family members. You run away, I know where your sister lives. I know who your brother is. I know where your mom and dad work now. And if you run or try to run, I'm going after them. And because of seeing all of this violence, they're also concerned about their family members. And they're trying, and again, we're talking 15, 16, 14, 18-year-olds that are just simply not equipped to process this because of their age. They don't know what to do.
Right.
Right.
And so I'm struggling here. Like, what's the solution? Is it educating young girls that there's these, I can't even think the word. It's a word I don't want to use, but these guys, that's
the problem is trying to come up with a word that doesn't give them too much credit, right?
These abductors or capturers out there, and so therefore be wary of them and be careful, or is it finding them and putting them in jail, which clearly legal enforcement undoubtedly try to do, or clearly there's got to be demand, because if there wasn't demand, and so it's the Johns that are a lot of the problem too, I presume.
Right, and so you're right. Education in so many different fronts. One, to our children, and that on signs and what to watch for. Another to our own employees, of what they may be seeing happening in their family with their child, with their niece, their nephew, their sister, etc. There are signs that you tell the traffic. I've been trying in the last 60 days now to get in front of companies in the financial service sector to say, we need to educate your employees so that they might be able to identify somebody that has come in, a customer, doing something, and identify them as a potential victim. Should they react? No. But now there's hotlines, human trafficking hotlines. There's law enforcement they call and say, hey, I suspect this is happening. So again, as I say, there's telltale signs. When sorry, let's talk about that, because that's kind of interesting. So the telltale signs, this would be for what, a bank manager or a loan officer, that some young 18 to 20-year-old young lady comes in and starts looking for a lot of debt and credit cards, etc., to pay for hotels and Airbnbs. Like, what are the telltale signs? So here are some telltale signs. We're talking about bank. You're talking about somebody that comes in to a cell phone store, and they come in with the mail, and the mail holds the identification. And when they ask for their driver's license or proof of identification, it's the mail that hands it over to the loans officer. And when the loans officer is finished with it, the mail is the one that takes it back. And the other thing I think needs to be looked at more closely is reviewing the ID. Because often we're talking about gangs or couples that are traffickers. It's a female that's going in to the bank, applying for the credit card or opening a bank account, the female trafficker. that looks nothing like the victim in the identification. And so it's being a little bit more aware, where there. I just dealt with a case this week where when the victim went into the branch, the loans officer knew something was going on, didn't know what. Tried to ask her if she was all right. Gave her $20 to take an Uber back home because he was concerned, for her. But he never called the police. He never called the human trafficking hotline to say, hey, something's happening here. And that's not his fault. It's education, right? I'm sure you and I are talking for the first time. You didn't know that we probably didn't know that there was a human trafficking
I never
hotline.
realized it was such a big issue. There's no question.
Right. So it's education, right? Another telltale sign is in game, probably talking predominantly games, where they will brand their victim by placing their name on their neck. So somebody comes in, they've got a name, tattooed on their neck. Things seem to be a little out of sorts, right? Maybe that's an indication. Maybe I should get somebody involved to look after this person.
These traffickers brand their victims with their name on their neck, like they're an animal.
Yes. Yeah. The worst I've heard, Brian, and I share this, not too much many cases, but I heard it from a law enforcement officer giving a speech, and that the victim was able to temporarily get away. And she was caught by her trafficker. And so on one cheek, he tattooed the word obey, and on the other cheek, respect.
Oh my God. What a story, Richard. So what about the Johns? Like, clearly without demand, and, we've talked about this a lot in the past on the war on drugs, is that you had to get rid of the demand. What can we do to diminish, if not get rid of demand?
I think part of the concern is that a lot of this go underground, and that that's not my sort of my game in this process, right? There's you only have certain bandwidth, and this takes up my entire day. I'm generally going.
How did you get motivated? Someone just came to you and said this is a problem, and you weren't even aware of it before, but you decided this was something you wanted to get involved?
I was going to a half hour to an hour meeting in November of 2017. And the more that I got involved in it, and the more that I understood, and the more that I heard from survivors, and that in January of last year, I stopped everything that I was doing, and now do this. There's no, as I keep trying to say to people as well, so that they understand, there's no money involved in this. There's no fees. There's no revenue. Nobody makes money, and that the funding for this entire operation comes from myself.
Well, thank you very much for what you're doing. So I guess if people want to donate to you, can they donate? Is there a charitable structure?
There isn't for Project Recover, and it's critical right now to do that for transparency with the financial institution creditors. 90% of them are on board. 90% of them work with us. 90% of them work hard and quickly to support survivors. There's still 10% out there for creditors that want nothing to do with this.
Really?
And some out there still feel creditors, okay, that the survivors should have to speak directly to their staff. Imagine an 18 or 19-year-old girl having to explain to 10 or 12 different creditors, and we're talking front-end staff, about everything that they went through. That's not something they should have to retell their story and then have to answer questions. Well, okay, I see the Airbnb charges. I see the Leo's List charges, right? Okay, but what was the $9 charge at Shoppers for in May of last year? One incidental charge. In the data transactional sense, Brian, what I often talk about too, is it becomes obvious not only for what's there, but what's not there. And you look at a survivor's credit card, for example, statement associated with the survivor. You don't see the retail purchases, at the Gaps, the Forever 21s, the hair salons, etc. That's not common for an 18 or 19 or 20-year-old. When you look at the bank statements and you see thousands of dollars daily, monthly going through an 18 or 19-year-old bank account, right? That's not common.
One would think there's almost an opportunity for artificial intelligence to go through young ladies' bank accounts to see this kind of typical charges and withdrawals.
So the term Project Recover came from an initiative of some of the major banks in Canada called Project Protect, which is doing exactly what you're saying, trying to identify suspicious transactions that lead to survivors, and it recognized around the globe as a great model. So the banks are trying to do something with it, absolutely. The problem, as we all know, is privacy laws limit what they can and cannot look at.
Well, I think the most important thing that comes out of this conversation is these telltale signs that you identified, and the 4 different types of what do you call them, abductors or traffickers.
Traffickers. Yep.
So it's the Romeo that makes out like he's your best friend or your boyfriend. The Guerrilla, is it Guerrilla that you called it? That
Guerrilla Trafficker. So they abduct somebody off the street out of a bar. But I give you another example in Ottawa last October. These 2 traffickers abducted 2 15-year-olds out of a mall in Ottawa, brought them to a hotel, explained to them what they were going to be doing, and somewhat teaching them, I guess, what they were going to be doing. Thankfully, one of those victims was able to get away, call police, and police were able to charge the traffickers. And it went through the court system. And the judge in Ottawa put them on probation because they actually didn't get to selling them. So you did all of that, but you didn't get to the actual trafficking. So we're going to put you on probation.
And they probably went back and just did it all over again.
Well, more than likely.
Well, thank you very much for. Actually, I thank you very much for what you're doing. I appreciate you letting us know about this problem. And how can we help?
And so there's another initiative out there called the Concord Adec Survivors Fund. When these survivors are free, able to escape, and they're ready to move on in their life, they're limited in resources more often than not to government assistance programs like ODSP and social welfare, and their only options are high risk housing options, where their trafficker is out on bail, out on probation, and so they have a fear of living. They're unable and not to get into post-secondary education. So the Concord Adec Survivors Fund, www.survivorsfund.ca. We're raising money to build safe housing for these survivors. Started in September of 2020. Our first house goes up in Guelph in February. Second house in Burlington. After that is Durham, and we'll continue on. We funded 4 survivors for the September term, the fall term, to go to school. And one of the best, gifts I got at the holiday season, one of those survivors achieved over 90 in every one of her courses through Seneca College. So survivorsfund.ca. Donate. It's a registered charity. You get a charitable tax receipt. And I make this statement: 100% of every dollar donated is getting into the hands of the survivors. The cost of administration of the fund, support of the program, that's coming out of somebody else's pocket. It's being funded so that the owners know that money's getting to the survivor. Survivorsfund.ca.
Survivorsfund.ca. Richard Dunwoody, the executive director of Project Recover. Thanks very much for joining us and telling us this really disturbing story. I appreciate it.
I appreciate your time and the opportunity, Ryan.
Thanks very much.